Hi, I'm Jordi Diaz Alamà. I'm a painter, teacher, and director of the Barcelona Academy of Art. My artistic work mainly focuses on the human figure and on portraits. I usually paint my works with oil painting, but I also like to explore and experiment with new plastic and pictorial resources. My goal is not to reproduce a photograph in all its likeness, but rather explain a human story through my personal interpretation. I've always studied the great classical masters and the academic methods as the basis of my artistic knowledge. In art, this theoretical knowledge must go hand in hand with practice. At the Barcelona Academy of Art, where I teach, I help my students to boost their technical abilities and go beyond their perceived abilities by developing their own skills and building up the necessary confidence to be a painter, sculptor, or a professional illustrator. We learn how to see, interpret, and translate concepts from live models and how to establish a solid basis to handle a wide variety of problems that may come along. In this tutorial video, we will make a portrait in drawing and painting using screen-based references. We will see how we can interpret photographic reference applying what we've learned with live models. We will go over the whole drawing process, the block-in stage, the transitions from a linear drawing to smudging to approach Chiaroscuro. Also, we will get to show a transfer method to our canvas to continue the guided process now in color painting, explaining theoretical concepts and analyzing several strategies to follow. This is a portrait course with a methodology aimed at being productive and efficient. We will see strategies to move our work forward in a fast manner. I hope this tutorial may be useful for you and you can make the most out of it. Shall we start? The drawing materials we're going to use are charcoal sticks of different hardness, Conte white chalk and white pastel. We will also need putty rubber, a sharp wooden stick, and arches paper, previously dyed with black ink. We start the first stage of the drawing by placing the basic elements of our portrait using blocking and very simple straight lines. Here we just need to add very basic information, very simple and fast, to relate all the elements with each other and double-check that everything's working with proportions. When these basic simple lines are ready, we will divide them into smaller lines. This way, as we had simplified a shape with a single trace and one line before, we can now break it in 2 and 3 lines, always straight and small. Of course, this is a scaffolding drawing, it's not definitive or attractive trace-wise. We're using this drawing as a method to create a structure that may serve as the basis to add more information from. These straight lines, as we proceed to subdivide them, must turn into an organic curvilinear shape. Therefore, by means of multiple straight lines, we can get to create a controlled curved line, until we get a curvilinear and more organic line.
Con lo cual, a través de múltiples líneas rectas, podemos llegar a hacer una línea curva controlada.
I have started this drawing using soft charcoal. In this case, it is HB charcoal because it lets me erase the trace easily without damaging the paper. It's important that it's a bit pointy to make the line drawings as accurate as possible. We start then with a basic drawing made up of lines before we move on to smudging, getting closer to a chiaroscuro drawing. However, in this tutorial, and in order to speed up the process, I add the information of values very fast to make it more dynamic. This process incorporates an academic practice we implement at the Barcelona Academy of Art. I'm going to give way to my own variations though, to make the most of our time and to be the most efficient and productive. In the end, the most important thing in this tutorial is to understand the different stages and witness the step-by-step process I use, together with its design strategy, to get an efficient result. This image shows the sequence we are going to use to tone down the drawing and create distinguishable groups of values. This sequence sets off from white paper. In this case, we are using tonal paper. Once we understand how to tone down our values from a white foundation, it will be easier to understand how to tone down and light up the sequence on a tonal paper. Keeping a certain order in the divisions will help us to organize our working process. Thanks to an organized working process, we will find results in a more direct and faster manner. Here you can already see the transition among our groups of values. In this case, we would add a group of light half-tones to the value of our paper. From here, we would stretch the contrasts to both extremes, using the charcoal on the one hand and the white chalk on the other hand. In our portraits process, we can start to see certain groups of values already, working with charcoal on those darker parts. If you pay attention, you can see that I have already included a lighter note to catch a glimpse of the final contrast I've decided for this portrait. Each layer will fill in the pores in the paper, and so we will get a smudge in the most uniform value. In this image, we can see how our outline will be and also our approach to the organization of our chiaroscuro. This planning should be as simplified as possible. Later, we will see how the grays are multiplied as different groups unite. It's important that these 5 basic values we've chosen are equidistant. With these 5 different grays, 5 values of light, we will represent the chiaroscuro. We can see in the figure below a complete color gradient where we would unify each of these 5 groups. Our drawing will have a lot of grays in the end, but each one will be organized and placed in a specific area. This organization is good to see and establish contrast. For example, realize that a half-tone in the cheek can be as intense as a half-tone in the forehead. By means of this group simplification, we will get a better general command of the light degree that each of the portrait's areas take up. Here I've just applied a wooden stick to flatten this spore and to reduce a bit the small imperfections on the paper. This paper weighs 300 grams, so it's very porous and we have to add layer after layer to obtain softness. I keep marking the structural drawing to avoid losing it. This is the basic drawing to move onto a painting, and I want the information to be visible in a clear way. We continue to subdivide lines. What I mentioned at the beginning, one line is divided in 2, 3, 4, until we get a curvilinear line. This kind of charcoal drawing is meticulous work. You need to move on little by little, patiently, creating layers of depth and value, trying to find the drawing and adding details. Notice how every time I unify I lose the dark value and other details that I will redo later. This makes the process a bit slower, but anyway, it's a matter of time to get the drawing completed. Once we know the nature of the process, it's essential to know where we're going and know when something is well done. Here I start to mark the group of lights. See how I try to avoid contact between the charcoal and the white chalk, at least at the beginning, because we don't want an additional gray now which will stain the drawing. This paper is dyed with black ink and it creates a warm basic value. Afterward, we will see how, by mixing the charcoal with the white chalk, we will get these very suitable small bluish tones which will provide temperature. There are warm areas overall in the shades, and the lights are colder groups and areas thanks to the mixture of charcoal and white chalk. I've decided not to cut the parts of the drawing process very much so that you can see and understand how layers are placed little by little with each trace and how we gain depth in the dark value and in the light value. I think it's interesting to see the process from beginning to end, although it may be a bit tedious. If we pay attention to this point in the drawing, we will see how the basic groups are well distributed. Now, I will unify and wave each group together. This way you can see the most intense blacks developed more in depth, the hair, the eyes, the background, the half-dark values in the cheeks, the nose shade, or the shadows cast by the eyebrows. The light half tones, represented with the base value of the paper, located in the nose, the cheeks, the forehead. For now, I'm pushing the light with the white chalk, getting closer to the highlight in the nose and the forehead. You can see how I'm pushing little by little to both sides, towards the light with the white chalk and towards the shadow with the charcoal, in order to create contrast in a light effect, a chiaroscuro effect. At this point, we can still see the borders, but we will go on to subdivide them slowly, as we have done with the lines until we find an almost perfect color gradient, which may bring about softness and soft volumes. In this image, we can see a sphere, which represents a transition among these groups very well. Here we have a basic guide which illustrates how our soft transitions will be. The different color gradients will make the volume and the chiaroscuro of the shape. We can see the highlight assigned as a bright point in this sphere, and then the part made with the white chalk in the lights. In this transition, the paper is assigned between the white chalk and the charcoal. The dark half tones made with charcoal will get us closer to the shadows. We can see the shadow line represented with a slightly darker value when compared to the shadows, the maximum level of dark we can reach with the charcoal. Now we can see the explanation of the sphere represented in the drawing, the volume of the nose and the volume of the spheres of the eyes. As you can see, I'm marking a shadow line under the eyebrows, a point which is darker than the base value of the shadow. I'm making it a bit excessive here so that you can see a bit the impression of a volume created with the shadow line and the values around. Together with these images of the shadow line is very useful to describe how a volume rotates. Depending on how the rotation of a shape may be, we will get it represented by means of a shape line or some other way. Everything will depend on the turn of the shape. Therefore, in a cylinder, the rotation is constant, so the transition is constant too. Depending on the light focus, whether it's closer or further away, we can have a more ambient kind of light. This gradient and transition to darkness would be longer, or on the contrary, it would be represented in a shorter way. In figure number 2, we have a cone, where we can see how the upper part turns at higher speed than the bottom. Therefore, the gradient will be longer and more stretched. In figure number 3, we have a cube, where there are no turns between the planes, so we can't find transitions and the shadow line will be cut. With a more complex figure, such as the representation of a pear, we can see how the shadow line, which will describe its volume, changes according to the turn in each part of the fruit. The drawing of this line will represent the prominence that makes up the horizontal plane. Well, going back to the drawing, I'm going to place here a painting value study that will be useful to project our idea of chiaroscuro in the drawing. You can see that the sketch volumetry is more noticeable than the drawing itself. This happens because the relationship among the different grays works better than in my drawing. Although there's no transition whatsoever between each one of these values, they are well related with each other. The drawing is being made and we need to go for that effect. I would also like to add that in order to represent light, one doesn't always need to look for the maximum contrast. Here we can see that, although it's not a very distant contrast, the representation of light works very well. As I said before, it's important to have a clear planning and a strategy to follow. That's why the value sketch is proving to be so useful here, even though it's painting to pre-visualize my drawing at a more advanced stage. We are using the sphere again to have in mind the light gradient that we aim for in our portrait. We can see that little by little the lower part is getting closer to the effect we have in our sphere. Now it's time to add some details. What I do here is drawing a bit the basic lines of brightness in the hair, some freckles, certain details that provide character and personality to our drawing. You can see that from a value point of view, I'm exceeding myself, but this is indeed intended to be integrated and blurred later on, so the intensity of contrast will be reduced and the integration will be much deeper. So we do this now in order to undo it later and achieve integration and subtlety. The portrait is making progress and I keep adding details, cleaning surfaces, flattening paper pores, increasing the softness in transitions and, still at this stage, widening the contrast and the distance between blacks and whites. I'm using series now of 8 charcoal, those which are harder, well sharpened to make the transitions softer overall in the light spot. After that I use those softer charcoal sticks, series HB and B, for the dark half tones in the background. It's essential at this point that the charcoal sticks are duly sharpened to get into the deepest paper pores. At the same time, series 8 charcoal will be useful to unify because of its hardness in a similar way to the wooden stick. I am using a small brush too, which helps me to blur the lines and integrate values in the most subtle areas. It is important to remember that we must do our best to avoid touching the drawing with our fingers. Our hands sweat, and if we touch the paper, we can leave greasy stains on it that will make the soft transitions more difficult. Here, you can see how I'm filling up the pores of the paper with a sharp charcoal. The drawing gradually becomes more soft, and the grainy aspect of the paper begins to disappear little by little. This small wooden stick is used to press the paper to flatten it and make the thicker lumps disappear. We are going to put the image in real time so you can appreciate the movement of the charcoal, especially when it comes to the unifying strokes as we seek for the maximum smoothness. We can see, for example, in the area of the hair, how it was very bright in contrast at first. With these strokes of charcoal, the light value decreases and it becomes more and more integrated in the background. For the shine of the hair, I use the conte with the chalk because it is more precise than a simple eraser. The white chalk might give us too much shine, but one way to lower it is to stain it with charcoal. From mixing the white of the chalk and the black of the charcoal, we will obtain a medium grey. The true added value of the theory that I'm giving you will start to make sense once you can practice each of the steps by yourself. I hope that all these concepts will help you understand the process. In art, repeated practice is very important, as well as working, when possible, with a natural model. It helps to educate the eye and our gaze, and to see and understand the steps you need to take in a very clear way. This is the reason why I decided to open a school, because I really think that it's very important to have a better and quicker learning process, thanks to the possibility of having a tutor who helps and guides the student in all this development. In art, knowing a lot of theory is important, but it also requires a lot of practice. Therefore, it's very important to consolidate all the concepts learned in order to be able to recreate them in our works. Having said all this, you can now see the finished drawing. You can observe how certain whites mixed with the charcoal have turned bluish and how they combine perfectly with the warm shades of the initial color of the paper. The drawing could have more detail, could have more information, we could also add more layers and more working time, but I think the result already works. I do not want to make an exact copy of the photography, but an interpretation of it. By not including an excess of detail, I think it favors this type of drawing, it looks more alive. We are going to do one last check on the final result, locating our 5 initial values in different parts of our drawing. There is a tool in Photoshop called Posterize that takes an image and simplifies it by number of values. We will now check how our drawing will look if we eliminated the transitions between groups to see how these values would be distributed. We see that the relationship between each of the groups is well maintained and therefore, the gradient of Chiaroscuro works in a simple way. Once the drawing is finished, I am going to teach you how to transfer it to the canvas and continue with the painting. We are going to use a vegetal paper to transfer those basic lines of structure to our painting support. To do this, we need to outline our drawing with a marker or a pencil. Then, we turn the vegetal paper and we go over the same lines with charcoal this time. We put the paper on the top of our canvas and we trace the drawing again, thus transferring it to our new support. We start by painting and fixing the drawing in charcoal with paint that is quite diluted. We also include a darker shadow value, differentiated from the lights, just as we did in the first stage of the drawing. We can also take this opportunity to paint details that have been lost and also rectify areas of the drawing that have been moved. Painting materials. To make this portrait, we will use the selection of oil colors that appears now on the screen. The oil tubes are from the brand Oil Holland, with the exception of magenta and cyan blue, which are from Winston & Newton. You will also need a palette with a surface big enough to mix the paint. As a medium, we will use linseed oil mixed with turpentine essence at a ratio of 50%. Also, at some point we will use liquid from Winston & Newton, a dense and drying medium or stun oil with a drop of cobalt dryer, to make a dense glaze that dries quickly so you will be able to work on it the next day. The brushes that we are going to use will be divided between stiff and soft synthetic hair. Those with stiff hair will be in the shape of a cat's tongue, filbert, and rather wide. Concerning the soft brushes with synthetic or ox hair, some should be wide to smooth out large areas, and the others should be round and narrow to work on details. Finally, we will paint on a canvas prepared with rapid glue and white pigment, glued on a wooden board. Before starting to paint, we will take a look again at our value study. You should find a combination that works and will guide you in the painting process. For this tutorial and before starting to paint with color, I decided to make a couple of layers in black and white that will act as the base of our painting and will save us a lot of modeling time. So, we're going to make a grisaille with a lot of impasto and focusing on the modeling of the shape. It's about being productive, and all these layers will give you a base volume that will continue to increase later with the color. For me, it's important that a painting has volume, just like a low relief. That's why in my work, I invest a lot in the modeling of the base, either with grisaille, like here, or with layers of color. In the next step, it is important to place the paint, following our predefined values as we are going to fill our canvas with the impasto. We're going to try to paint the white areas with more paint and use a rather transparent paint in those darker areas. Once the paint is set, it's important to model it, unify it, and give it a certain softness, creating transitions, just as we did in the final part of the drawing. Painting is faster than drawing, and we must consider all the previously learned concepts and apply them directly. In the video, you're seeing simultaneously how I am applying the paint by planes with brushes of stiff hair. I then start to unify and smooth out the surfaces with a soft hair brush. I repeat the process again until the layer is thick enough. I continue putting impasto on the lights, modeling with the brush by following the shape. In this session, I am only going to paint the portrait, so that in the next session I will put a second layer of darkness in the background. We are going to paint the background with transparent layers. While painting, it is very normal to lose the drawing. There is no need to worry too much because as it has already been done once, the drawing will appear again while painting. For this same reason, in this step where we are modeling large masses of paint, I usually have the drawing well marked so as not to lose it easily. In this image, we see the representation of a sphere containing the gradient that we are going to use, from the brightest lights to the darkest shadows. The arrows represent the circular movement of the brush. As we have previously said, we will try to make the shadows somehow transparent and the lights with a lot of impasto. In the graphic below, we see the representation of this cut in the curve that will add up the level of impasto in the maximum point of light. Therefore, the more illuminated the value is, the more amount of paint it should have. There is a really interesting point in the union between the impasto and the transparent areas. An area which has been previously covered with impasto, or half impasto, can become transparent if we apply transparent layers of glazing on top of it afterwards. This way, the oil will end up invading the dark medium areas until disappearing in the light areas. The canvas usually has a basic texture, but we can also get a flat surface with multiple layers of oil. A transparent flat surface, made up of many layers of color, would be the opposite of the biggest paint impasto. Here we are talking about quality on the surface, a quality that ultimately gives us plasticity and variety of resources in our work. I've divided this stage in two different sessions to add more paint volume. In this fast second session, I'm going to include more value information and more accuracy in the drawing too. Having a grisaille as a basis may come in handy to repaint the portrait in color because it is a useful guide in the mixtures we have to make. When we add new color on top of it, we can see that this is too dark, for example, and we can rectify immediately because we already have a well-related basis. It's true that I'm making a grisaille which is brighter than usual so that I can glaze certain areas later. Glazing reduces luminosity, so it's important that the basis is bright enough. My plan is to work with glazing on all the dark half tones and the shadows and to keep on applying impasto from the light half tones. In this process, you can see how I'm measuring all the relationships amongst values and how I start to overlay the background and the shadow part of the portrait with glazing. We put more paint in the maximum lights, we soften and integrate again, and we start to detail with a thin brush those parts we want to glaze. Very well, now I will be talking about color and about the palette I've chosen to make this portrait with. Basically, I'll be using a reduced palette with 5 colors: lead white, yellow ochre, vermilion, raw umber, and ivory black.
Tierra sombra natural o raw umber y el negro de ivory, conocido como negro marfil.
In essence, we will be doing everything with these colors. I also have a secondary color section as a reinforcement. As I said before, the lights will be cold, so I need some cool colors in my palette. I have magenta, phthalo green, and transparent oxide red, which is warm, but which will be very suitable to enhance a feeling of warmth and transparency in the shadows. For me, there is a basic palette, which is complemented with certain colors depending on what we have to do. If we have to do landscape, we would obviously have other kinds of colors, such as ultramarine blue or transparent green. The color section changes to match our interests or the type of painting we aim for. It is not the same to create an academic, more realistic painting as a more dramatic painting with a high saturation. We may resort to colors for changes, but in this case I've chosen this basic simple palette for the portrait representation. It's enough, the less colors in our palette, the better. The result will be more harmonious and well related. Lastly, I have the reinforcement colors that I'll be using just to create certain effects and final touches, in this case blue, cyan blue, and carmine. Consequently, I will arrange them in my palette from lighter to darker tones, and I will spread them out according to their importance or the amount of them I'll be using. As you can see, the lighter colors, those I'm going to use for the lights, are dense and opaque colors, and the colors I will use for the dark half tones and shadows are basically transparent colors. Here I am showing you a color study where you can clearly appreciate different color nuances depending on the portrait area. It's a saturated study, and there are no transitions among the different value plans. On the left, you can see that each color has been assigned a basic value. Also, you can see in the sketch how the lights come from a colder color selection and the shadows from a warmer one. I have gone for this color relation because I think it can work very well in our portrait. As you can imagine, these colors won't be like this in the painting. This is the plan to follow, the roadmap I have to know the twists in each of the color nuances. In this image, you will see how I found each of these colors. Notice that the colors tend to be brighter and have a higher base saturation. That's why I'm partly mixing them with a gray, which kills a bit the saturation and diminishes the brightness. All in all, we will start to paint by placing the basic colors from our study. I am placing them here as they are so that you can see their correspondences. Later on, I will desaturate them to obtain more realistic skin colors, and we will boost the color only in some areas. Now, we will repaint the whole portrait with color in pastel. Remember that the grisaille has been useful to spare us a couple of impasto sessions with direct color, so the painting tutorial could really start here. As I mentioned before, my goal is to be efficient and to create this bas-relief in a fast manner. Therefore, in this image we can see more desaturated colors in each local area. In this other image, we can observe the thickness of the painting. Notice how the transparent parts are basically glazing that uses the drawing and value from our previous grisaille. In this image, we have our study palette adapted to a sphere. We have assigned two different groups of color nuances to our value distribution. We can see the sphere divided, on the one hand between light and shadows, and, on the other hand, another division of local colors from earth colors turning into greens and reds to violets. The color of the maximum light and the color of the shadows will be shared in both color families assigned. In graphic number 2, we can see the same sphere, both more saturated and less saturated, in order to help us decide which direction to take depending on the result we are aiming for. Let's talk about the organization of the work in our palette. We distribute the colors in ranges from lighter tones to darker tones, and from more dense to more transparent. We also divide our color mixes and separate impastos, semi-impastos, and transparencies. The objective here is to separate them and avoid contact between the dark, opaque, dense colors we will use for the impastos and our more transparent colors to work on glazing. Now I would like to speak about color theory. We will focus on the mixture of pigments. Color theory is a really broad area, so I'm going to describe only the most useful part to apply it to this exercise. We can see here the basic standard chromatic circle with the basic colors and secondary color which, as you know, come from mixing primary and tertiary colors. It's important to know that there's a tonal value assigned to each color. We can see this in graph number 2. We need to have this in mind when we are preparing our mixtures so that the brightness of colors is not altered. If we want to mix colors with each other without cancelling them or changing their value a lot, we would need to mix the color with its neighbor color. That is to say, if we have a yellow and we want to cool it down, we will go and look for a bit of green and mix it with our tertiary color. What happened at this point? Well, all this base is a theory, but mixtures will be affected by the materials we are using and the paint tubes, since each manufacturer creates color compositions and mixtures in a different way. It is important to get to know them to make sure everything is working properly. We need to distinguish between the color nuance, the light value, and the saturation. These are three conceptual axes whose combinations produce all the mixtures. The color nuance corresponds to tonality, either red, yellow, or green. The light value corresponds to luminosity or darkness, and saturation corresponds to intensity and color purity. In graph number 1, we can see how our circle wins and loses light. In graph number 2, we see which gray value can be used to light up or darken a color, and in the following graph we can see how we can alter the saturation by mixing the complementary without altering the light value, as long as both colors start from the same tonal value. Depending on the type of painting we want to achieve, we must know which direction to take when mixing colors, whether it be adding white or black, neutral, or using the complementary color to find a new color, losing saturation when breaking it in obtaining a gray that is not neutral anymore. Remember that the mixture between complementary colors cancels each other, forming new colors. In this new image, you can now observe these basic concepts. In graph number 1, we can see different shades of color with the same saturation and value. In graph number 2, we have altered the light value maintaining the same hue and saturation. And finally, in graph number 3, the same value and color hue is desaturated and saturated. Acknowledging these concepts, we will now continue painting the portrait. I am now creating new color planes, and just as we were subdividing lines before, here we are going to start subdividing planes. We will start by subdividing each local area of color, multiplying the variety and richness of these as we generate new values for the transitions. Then, we are going to integrate and merge each plane to make the transition smoother. We add a new layer of color in pastel to increase the volume of the painting's relief. Notice that until now we are only building up the base and preparing the surface. With this image, we are able to closely observe the volume and impasto that we have been adding. Also, you can see the approximation of the subdivided colors and the more luminous values that are making way for the glazes. Once the base is dry, we will now focus on the values and color. Here you can see how I'm creating some glazing to darken and give some distance between the dark values and the lighter ones. These glazes are basically made of oil with very little paint. With colored glazes, what I do is to intensify those parts that I want to be more colorful. At the moment, these are just general glazes that integrate and blend with the base. We can now check again the graph explaining the transition from glaze to impasto. At this point, I would use glaze on small focal points such as the eyes, lips or nose, and I would repaint the lights with a clean color. With a more controlled brushstroke, we can begin to incorporate details. At this point, I realized that there were certain traces of impasto that generated, in some parts of the skin, a texture that did not convince me entirely. I was looking for softness on the skin, so I decided to remove some of these textures with the help of a blade. Once the surface was sanded, some parts of the portrait had to be repainted. In oil painting, everything adds up, and even if we make mistakes, we can always repaint and repair. It's important to have a rich base that will give us more possibilities in terms of plasticity and variety in the work. Now we are going to proceed to painting the hair in the same way that I did with the drawing. First, we're going to create the complete shape. Then, with the use of glazes, integrate the shape to the background, subtly suggesting some of its parts. At the same time, the hair has movement and it should be out of focus and transparent, so that it generates a feeling that it is suspended in the air, preventing it from looking like a solid and stiff mass. The use of glazes with color also allows us to easily alter not only the value but also the color. Painting using a photograph seen through our computer screen can easily generate errors when projecting the base light. For this reason, it is important to know how to reinterpret the sensation of light and not copy it literally as we see it in the screen. We have to get to a point, no matter if it's painted using photography or using a model, in which we need a personal interpretation and decision making. We must add our vision and interpretation of reality, so that what we do has a deeper sense of message and can even become more descriptive. Painting is not a matter of making a literal copy of the reference image, but rather trying to capture what is not seen and transmitted. It is important that we do not become slave of any medium and use our sources consciously. For this very reason, in the final stages of our process, we will try to paint following our own criteria and imagination and, if we can, leaving out the reference image. I think this is the way we will give personality and identity to our work. At this stage, I am putting on the last layers of painting, adding intensity to the color in some areas, cleaning and smoothing certain surfaces, and including accents and some more expressive and loose strokes. Finally, I am adding some more details in certain areas. It is important to build our work based on a coherent strategy. Painting in layers is like an obstacle course. You have to properly learn each step to reach the next one. As I've mentioned previously, if we fall or fail, we need to keep insisting with patience and hard work, and we will always manage to finish our work. To finish this video tutorial, I would like to make a last revision of our color plan. In this image, we can locate the colors of each area with their light value and their relationship with the rest. Therefore, we see how, at an organizational level, the color remains simplified and functional. The most luminous colors, as in pastels, have a cold predominance and the shades remain transparent and rather warm. If we now compare it with our color study, we are surprised by the high degree of similarity, except for the general saturation. In figure number 2, we can see we have desaturated our color study to check out the similarity. But in figure 3, we can see we rightly anticipated the direction we were going to take. In this image, you can see the calendar of sessions for the painting portrait and the drawing portrait. Some of these work sessions will have been shorter and other longer. They are distributed between different days, especially in paint, to be able to work on a dry support. It will be important to respect the drying times for this type of painting, which is made up of layers. I really hope you liked the video tutorial, and I would like to thank you very much for bearing with me until the end. You are all welcome to come and meet us at the school to see how we work and apply some of the concepts you learned about today. I will be very happy to meet you. Thank you very much, and see you in the next tutorial.